The powers delegated by the proposed Constitution to the federal government are few and defined. Thus wrote James Madison in the famous Federalist Paper No. 10. And constitutionalists have for decades now sought to reverse the tide of progressive leftist thought and action in America, which has always led to more and more power for the federal government, far beyond anything prescribed in the Constitution, far beyond anything even considered during the first century of this new nation when we laid the groundwork for the greatness that awaited America. Indeed, the current state of affairs in which we find ourselves, with the central government encroaching on every area of our lives and paying for it with trillions of dollars they don't have, didn't happen overnight. It began more than a century ago. Before he became president in 1912, Woodrow Wilson said those who honor the Constitution as it's written were engaging in political witchcraft. And Wilson opened the floodgates to de facto revision of a constitution that had produced more freedom and prosperity than any nation in the history of the world. We were a nation that desperate people fled to not for guarantees, but for opportunity. In the mid-20th century, Soviet Premier Nikita Khrushchev boasted to a U.S. cabinet member, "You Americans are so gullible. No, you won't accept communism outright. But we'll keep feeding you small doses of socialism until you'll finally wake up and find you already have communism. We won't have to fight you. We'll so weaken your economy until you'll fall like overripe fruit into our hands." Well, the Soviet Union has been relegated to the ash heap of history, but here we are in 2014 with leftists representing not just academia and media, but America's ruling class for several years now. And the result is almost 100 million people out of the workforce, the highest percentage in 35 years. And about half of those who are working are in part-time jobs. And almost 50 million people are on food stamps. We're in the midst of the most sluggish, uneven recovery in modern history. Our economy actually shrank by 3% in the first quarter of the year. And the rising generation of American children are falling well behind the rest of the world in academic achievement. So here's a question that's always relevant but rarely asked, and which hits at the heart of the matter. What would the left do if they were completely unconstrained by political reality and they could get away with anything they want? Well, it's clear, not just from the last few years, but from the long march of history, that progressives would increase taxes substantially across the board, enforce not just government-managed, but fully government-controlled health care, and would enlarge the size and scope of public unions. They'd provide for unlimited abortion on demand with no restrictions, would essentially open our borders to all comers, and as we've seen in recent years, would actually increase police power and eliminate private ownership of guns. They'd effectively shutter the coal and oil industries in favor of green energy, and they'd enforce diversity for its own sake in matters of race, gender, and sexual orientation, while shutting down intellectual diversity. You can always speculate and render many an opinion on the possible or likely or even inevitable effects of a political philosophy. Many a constitutionalist did so regarding the progressive movement long before it picked up steam a century ago, but there's nothing to replace experiencing the reality of it. The American people granted the hard left more power in recent years than ever before. So the question is, how is that working out for you?